Hey, everybody. So apparently, there is a dying breed in America. There's a breed that, unfortunately, people are saying is not being represented in workplaces across the country and even being discriminated against. And many of us would probably not be able to guess this dying breed in the workplace, but apparently, it is the white male. So let's talk about it. Welcome to another episode of the Holy Politician Podcast. So, the video that I'm getting ready to play for you is not a spoof. This is a real clip from the chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, historically known for enforcing, I don't know, civil rights laws in the workplace. And so, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission essentially provides oversight of federal civil rights laws that were put in place due to discrimination against women and people of color. And so, apparently, the tide is turning. Here is the chairwoman in her own words. And again, this is not a spoof. This is a real clip. Take a look.
I'm Andrea Lucas, Chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Are you a white male who's experienced discrimination at work based on your race or sex? You may have a claim to recover money under federal civil rights laws. Contact the EEOC as soon as possible. Time limits are typically strict for filing a claim. The EEOC is the federal agency charged with enforcing federal anti-discrimination law against businesses and other private sector employers. The EEOC is committed to identifying, attacking, and eliminating all forms of race and sex discrimination, including against white male applicants and employees. Check out eeoc.gov to learn more and read our one-page explainer about DEI-related discrimination.
So apparently, your employers have been blocking white males from jobs, overlooking them as candidates, even because of your quote woke attitudes, right? So I have a few thoughts on this. And I was actually, when I first saw that clip on X, I almost just couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a minute. Am I in the right country? Is this the right dispensation? Is this the year 2025 when I saw it? And so I truly thought it was a spoof. I thought it maybe was SNL, but I mean, obviously, it doesn't take a lot of research to go to EEOC.org and see who the chairperson is. So it's real, right? And so if you visit EEOC.org on the homepage, you can learn more about how to file a charge of discrimination for what they call, quote, DEI related discrimination. And so as I reflected on that clip and the EEOC's efforts here, I had to go back a few years back when I was in a government space and heard complaints, actual complaints, that people private messaged me about Black women in leadership only hiring other Black women in a particular government agency. And that, unfortunately, that kind of shook me a little bit because I had never heard anything like that egregious happening, like directly and outright, where somebody intentionally is doing this. But it also sounds a lot like complaints from white women and people of color throughout the years that white males only hire other white males, right? So there's actually a phenomenon behind this, and there's language that people have coined, certain terms that have been given, whether it's affinity bias, which basically means to have an affinity bias means that you have a preference for or an affinity toward people who are like you, right? For example, if you graduated from UCLA, if you were a UCLA Bruin and you are looking for candidates to fill a particular role, if you get a job application that comes in and it happens to say that Marsha Levine also is a UCLA Bruin and she did her undergraduate work at UCLA, right? And so you're like, wow, well, this is so cool. This person has something in common with me. Let me interview her. And so people do this by nature, right? It doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that they're trying to be egregious, but it happens because we like to be with like groups, people that come from our, backgrounds that can associate with something like us. We like to feel like we're in clubs and cliques. That's human nature. There's another term called unconscious bias, which refers to automatic mental shortcuts and associations that we form. All of us have these automatic associations that we have in our brains without us even being aware that it's happening. but our brain is triggering us about certain realities, right? And these realities influence the way that we perceive and respond to people or situations. So, an example of unconscious bias might be many of us, when we think of smart people, like when you think of a smart person, what comes up as an image in your mind? Me? Oh my gosh, I'm so honored. Thank you. Well, when I was in college and even in high school, when I thought of smart people, it automatically clicked in my mind that I was thinking of an Asian male, just automatically, partly because that's who I grew up around. But typically, Asians are known as the model minorities, right? They're smart, they're respectful, they follow all the rules. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but these are kind of assumptions and stereotypes that we make that drive the way that we treat people, look to them, look down on them, right? If you say somebody's acting ghetto, what's going to come to mind for you? Maybe a black person, right? And so these are the unconscious biases that our mind takes on. And this is how we treat people, whether good or bad. But some of what's been happening in workplaces in America is actually a lot more egregious than this, right? It's giving South Africa, right? So if you look back in the clips that I recorded previously last year, we went into this long conversation about employment in South Africa, about how Black South Africans are treating their fellow brothers and sisters in that country. And so in South Africa, Black South Africans are intentionally discriminating against coloreds and whites, right? These are people that came from the same land, grew up on the same land, have equal rights to the same land and job opportunities as anybody else. And so, this egregious thing that's happening in American workplaces is giving South Africa. And I'm not saying necessarily that this type of behavior is widespread, but I can discern enough to know that it's happening, right? There are people that are out there that are discriminating on purpose. It doesn't matter what your color is. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, in between. It doesn't matter what your color is. There are people that are giving preferential treatment on purpose because they don't want somebody else to get their leg up or for whatever reason. It's egregious and it's frankly evil. Nobody should be doing this. And so why is Trump's EEOC stepping in? Well, this anti-discrimination practice or governance over the workplace, it emerged because one, women were excluded from many professions. People of color were systematically denied jobs. Like, we know this to be true. They were denied promotions, they were overlooked for opportunities, denied fair and equal pay, which still doesn't happen today. And then there was such thing called the Jim Crow law that was explicit exclusion against blacks. And so this is historical knowledge. This should not surprise anybody, but that's why we had the EEOC, right? And so now Trump's administration, they deplore DEI. They almost deplore anything concerning civil rights, or they're turning the tide around. We've talked about how there's been really the Supreme Court ruled against affirmative action because an Asian person sued a university and a white person sued a university as well, saying that their applications were very good applications, but they were not given a seat because of a person of color, right? And so the conservative administrations are trying to clean this up. Now, what's very important to note, though, is that we are still waiting on hard data that's I've seen on social media and some other media outlets and articles that are saying white men are being prolifically discriminated against. They are not given opportunities, and this is not necessarily all white men, but they're saying it's of a particular generation, specifically millennials. So we're waiting on like conclusive data that shows that this is happening writ large and that it's so widespread that there need to be these claims that are filed. Now, if somebody's being discriminated against, it doesn't matter who you are, you should be able to file a claim. But the way that it's being presented is as if this is so widespread and it's so preposterous and oh my God, the world is going to come to an end. The reality is that whether you like to admit it or not, whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter. It's of no consequence. But white men still hold most seats of power. They're still the predominant CEOs. They still dominate board seats, right? In every industry, on every board you can imagine. They still dominate leadership teams. They still get paid higher salaries than women and people of other races. and they still carry the greatest amount of wealth. Now, does this mean that they should be discriminated against? No, but this also doesn't mean that they're not still the ones that hold the power. And so maybe one of these days we should focus our energies, like people always like to say, on truly becoming a colorblind society, right? So that we're not having these petty conversations about race anymore. And so that when you are going online and you're trying to get like really helpful and meaningful news articles, you don't see things that you think are spoofs. Because when it comes down to it, this is just yet another distraction. And so I would be remiss if I ended this podcast without sharing this very preposterous, in my opinion, clip by Matt Walsh. Take a look.
The biggest and most important downstream consequence of this open discrimination against white men is that everything in society gets worse as a result. That is the second order effect that the compact piece doesn't really get into. It's the third rail, the part you're not supposed to talk about. But the truth, which everybody intuitively knows, is that things were a lot better back when white men were not being discriminated against by every institution in the country, but instead were running most of them. And the fact of the matter is that a hugely disproportionate number of our greatest leaders, innovators, pioneers, explorers, philosophers, and so on have been white men. I mean, without white men, we wouldn't have airplanes or spaceships or trains or phones or light bulbs or computers or the internet or batteries or X-ray machines or jet engines or rockets or 1,000 other things that our society depends on to exist and to flourish. We never would have had a railway system or the printing press. We wouldn't have this country, which was founded by white men and led by white men and expanded from coast to coast and settled and built up mostly by white men. Now, these are all facts.
Matt Walsh, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody knows that things were a lot better when white men were running most of the institutions in America. Our greatest philosophers, heroes, leaders, presidents, explorers were white men. This country was founded and built up mostly by white men. You do realize how ridiculous this sounds, right? Like there are and were plenty of people of all hues, races, etc., that helped to generate an economy and a society that is now the most prosperous. It might be the most preposterous, actually, society in the world. Retract that. Not yet. But the most prosperous country is the United States of America. And it wasn't only white men who contributed to that, given Native and Indigenous people were here first. And they helped us learn about climate and environment and how to plant and how to reap and how to harvest. They helped us learn about medicines. They help people to know how to plant certain things in certain times and how to get the right crop and the right harvest. You know that there are black inventors and pioneers, right? Whose inventions were stolen and assigned to white men. Not to mention that there were black men who discovered ingenious medical feats and inventions and whose credit was stolen. Do I have to remind us that enslaved people built a good portion of the southern part and the southeast part of the United States of America? And it was on the backs of enslaved people, which truly has made America one of the most prosperous countries because of free labor, right? And so I just want to encourage Matt Walsh to have several seats because, oh, boy, sometimes I wonder, do some of these people have any black people in their lives? Like, how do you say such, or people of color at all? Because how do you allow such words to roll off your mouth in such a way with such confidence and defiance? And you're making such a declarative statement that just doesn't make any sense at all. This country, if you want to know why it's facing partial ruin, is because we've taken Christ out of everything. We've taken him out of our schools, public meetings, off printed materials. We can't even pray anymore in many respects. Prayer has been banned, right? We're permitting boys to become girls and girls to become boys because we've taken God out of everything and we've nearly lost our morality, right? But since white men were in charge of all of these things when these things happened, should we then be blaming white men for our demise? So let's not be ridiculous, right? Make it make sense. Whenever we have these conversations about race and about discrimination and about, who is not giving access to whom, we really need to think about the spiritual heart of the matter. Because honestly, race is of no consequence when we're thinking about spiritual matters, that is. And so one of these days, we're going to have to stop being duped and stop being deceived and truly understand what is at the heart of the matter. There are more important things for us to be talking about, like artificial intelligence and how that is literally shifting the landscape of our children to be competent, to be confident, to be cognitively inclined, for opportunities, for job opportunities and careers. All of these things are important because robots are going to be taking jobs, not people of color, right? And so the Lord is coming. Thank you for watching another episode of the Holy Politician Podcast. God bless you.